Welcome everyone that is tuning into Mannys Super Civic Cyber Conversations. Before we get into the introduction, I just want Dan Pfeiffer to raise his glass real quick and let's drink some water together. Oh,
Yes, I'm having water.
what are you drinking?
Water.
You're drinking
Tap,
water.
even.
Out
Water.
of, tell us about that cup you're drinking out of, that red Solo
That
cup. Did you get that at
it's
like a frat party you went to last week or something?
it's left over from a summer 2019 barbecue.
It's been there for over a year.
Yeah, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We are rationing things. We are digging into our barbecue supplies.
Those are disposable.
I mean, we reuse them because we love the planet.
Okay. Welcome everyone to Manny Super Civic Cyber Conversations. My name is Manny and I own a small business in San Francisco called Mannys on the corner of 16th and Valencia. We had to shut down because of the shelter in place order, but just because the physical place is, closed, I just had sparkling water, doesn't mean that the work is over. The work continues, and so we've moved our programming online. I'm proud to say we're almost at 100 of these civic conversations in a month. We've been doing these every single day. And I just want to thank you so much for participating and for tuning in right now. You can tag us at Welcome to Mannys at any time. And if you feel compelled to support my small business, which we would definitely need given how everything's going, you can go to the chat box and you can click on the link and you can become a sponsor of Mannys, which I will shower you with good karma and Jewish love. If you have a question for Dan Pfeiffer, you can type it in at any time in the Q&A box. You don't have to wait till the question and answer session. We're going to talk for about 20 minutes. And then if you have questions, we'll get to the Q&A at the last portion of this. So feel free to ask your questions. Do not be shy. Okay, Dan, first I want to ask, what are all these plaques behind you? And where are you in your house? What is this room? What magic happens in this room?
This is my office, which is the back half of my garage, which is where I record Pod Save America. And behind me are a collection of random framed things I had, but most of them are all Obama memorabilia. It's the front page of the Des Moines Register from the day after Obama won, the front page of the New York Times the day after he was reelected. There is a picture taken, sort of a famous picture among Obama folks, of this massive crowd of people who were in Germany to see Obama during the campaign. So it's sort of my nostalgia wall, if you will.
Got it. So this is the room where you record Pod Save America. What's the room?
Yes.
I have a lot of rando questions that are just going to bop around everywhere, okay?
Go for it.
I'm sure you can handle it. So what's the mood with Pod Save America these days? Like, I know that a lot of podcasts are like, okay, I guess everything we do has to be around coronavirus. But like, I imagine as a journalist and as a communicator, it might be kind of tough to have one topic. And what do you guys, how is that working? How's Pod Save America going?
Well, I mean, this is something we've been sort of struggling with, which is we always talk about what's in the news, right? That's a big driving thing. And everything in the news right now is coronavirus. But there's only so many times that you can respond to the Trump absurdity at the press conference of the day. So we've been trying to think about ways to broaden out the conversation, to talk about other things. Like last week, John Pfeiffer and I spent a lot of time talking about how the Democratic Party can unify. And now coronavirus hangs over everything, particularly over politics. But are there ways that we can enter into that conversation that's not just things are terrible, how did Trump make them worse? Go vote in 2020. Like, what's a deeper version of that conversation? And we're trying to think about that in both how we talk about it and what guests we have on to think about, so sort of think about different ways. And in a normal world, we'd be transitioning to like full-time coverage of the 2020 election, but we're sort of stuck in this purgatory where the election has started, people are starting to run ads, but the focus is people are not paying a ton of attention to politics, at least in a traditional campaign sense.
Some people are saying that, like, where's Joe Biden? You know, like, people are paying more attention to the Tiger King than Joe Biden right now. And do you feel like it's Joe Biden's camp is like not doing what they need to be doing, like is not rising above? Or do you think they're like strategically being like, this is not a time for us to be like campaigning a lot. We need to take a back seat to the pandemic.
Well, I hear people say all the time to me, like, and people who normally pay a pretty good amount of attention to politics are like, why isn't Joe Biden out there? And then I have to be like, he was on CNN on Monday, he was on MSNBC on Tuesday, he did The View Wednesday, He was on Deuces and Mero last night. And so like he's
Is
doing
he? He's
things, but
doing all that?
yeah, he is doing all those things, but
Mhm.
it's just very, very hard to break through in this media environment, particularly when you are locked in. He's literally locked in this basement, right? He can sit in front of those bookshelves and talk to reporters, and that's all he can do. And so, obviously, you can always do things a little bit better and like have some more creative ideas, and like that's all true. But the structural problem of trying to communicate in a presidential campaign from your basement
Mhm.
when in the middle of a crisis
Mhm.
is quite challenging. And so I think we have to have somewhat realistic expectations about what he can accomplish in that role.
So let's talk about talking from your basement and addressing the nation,
Mhm.
because one of the things I wanted to pick your brain on, which I really hate that phrase because it's so violent sounding, but I can't think of something better, is like how leaders are communicating to people right now, because everyone's attention is concentrated, right? We're really only listening through our screens for the most part because we're not in groups. And it's like the Queen's speech, I was into it. I was like, thank
Yeah.
you, Elizabeth. I needed you right now. Like, you
Mhm.
came through when I needed you. Obama's endorsement of Biden, that was another moment where I was like, oh, thank you so much. And then we have the daily press conferences that Cuomo and Newsom are doing. Can you tell me who you think has been utilizing the moment really well and the tools really well to communicate to folks?
Well, I think the two people who've probably been doing it best are Cuomo and Newsom. Cuomo obviously has captured the attention of the
Oh
nation.
my God.
He's live on
I'm
television
literally,
almost every day.
I'm stealing him from his wife. Like, I'm getting in there. I'm done with that marriage.
I mean, it's like a weird thing because I mean, he's been governor forever. He had a pretty checkered reputation before this, was constantly fighting with de Blasio, a very divisive figure within Democratic politics who would sort of won power with kind of brute force. But he's found himself in a situation where the things that made some Democrats not like him before work very well in this moment. And he's also shown a human side of himself involved with his brother and those other, and talking about their parents.
Did you
They've
see the
never
Sunday
manifested
dinner?
stuff before.
Did you see the Sunday dinner picture he
Yeah,
put with the
yeah,
meatballs and his kids? And I was like,
yeah.
I want to have meatballs with Andrew Cuomo.
And so he's obviously used it to it's hard to know like what is maximum effect, right? Like what maximum effect really is here is not theoretically making people like you more, although that does matter if you're running for reelection, which Andrew Cuomo was not. But it is, are you using your platform to communicate to people necessary information that will help save their lives, right? Like when to go to a hospital, who to call, what things not to do. And it's Cuomo and Newsom have both, to their credit, utilized their platforms and given people the information they need to quote unquote flatten the curve. And I think in that sense, they've done a very, very good job. And I'm sure there are other governors around the country who have done a good job. But you would only sort of know that if you were, I know Newsom's done a good job because I live here in California. And I know Cuomo's done a good job because he's on TV all the time. But it's really about like this is where politics somewhat goes to the side, and it's like how do you have this platform, how do you use it to tell people things that will actually make the problem better.
Hmm. And what about people like the Queen that occupy not like a policy position in our lives, but a symbolic and kind of almost philosophical position in our world? Where do you see people like that stepping up and providing relief using these new tools?
I mean, there are people with, there are a lot of people using sort of digital platforms and thinking creatively to help people in this moment, whether it's, the Queen, obviously, she's the head of the state, not the head of government, and therefore she can speak inspirationally. And I think to those of us in America who are not finding that comfort from the White House briefing room every day, it means even more. There are others who have done it in various ways, whether it's all the musicians at the concert the other night,
Beyonce.
whether it is, yeah, exactly, or whether it's like D Nice doing his DJ parties that everyone's watching, or David Chang and Jose Andres who are using their platforms and their to raise attention to both people who are hungry and the plight of people in the restaurant industry. So there are a lot of people doing really interesting things. And I think they stick out more because the place where people traditionally expect it in American life is from the White House, because the presidency is this unique, the American presidency is this very unique role in the world, because the president is both head of government in the sense that they are the person responsible for making sure people get tests and making sure there's a sufficient PPE, but they're also the head of state. So they have this job of running the government and consoling the nation at the same time. And that has been a tradition that is bipartisan, that Trump has essentially walked away from the head of state part of this, which is why we look to the Queen of England, which is historically ironic, if you will.
He is fucking up so badly right now. Like,
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to ask you about this, but I just kind of give my own opinion. How would you grade President Trump right now and how he's doing communicating to the nation?
If you do communication alone, it's like a C minus.
Okay.
And if you do the job of managing the crisis, it's an F. And the reason why I say that is he gets a C minus because the job has been so abysmal, yet his political standing has stayed just about where it was before the crisis started. And so you have to give him some credit for at least convincing some of the people that he's not responsible for all the problems that are happening. But just on an objective level, the preparation and response in the United States has been one of the worst in the world. And we should theoretically have been one of the best in the world. And he had a roadmap that was prepared for him for these exact moments. And he reflexively walked away with it because it had Obama's name on it, and America has paid the price since then. And this is ultimately what is true of like communications in the world is there is like, if Trump is doing an A+ communications job, it wouldn't change the fact that the entire economy had to shut down because we didn't have enough tests to test people. It wouldn't change the fact that Trump promised there would be tens of millions of tests now, and we've done a total of 4 million tests over a month. Like, you can't, there's no spin, there's no press conference, there's no television ad that solves that problem. So ultimately in a crisis, the communications is important, but it can only put so much lipstick on the pig.
Ew.
It's a saying.
That's so violent. Red Solo Cup. So maybe, I wonder how much of it is Dr. Fauci and just like him being around.
I would give his communications an A+, and I'm just in the context of Fauci doing that Instagram live chat with Steph Curry is the first thing that first thing that has happened in the Trump administration that I looked at and I said that seemed like something we would have done in the White House, because when we were trying to get people to sign up for Obamacare, right? We had this problem that in order to make the system work, you need to get young people to sign up, particularly young men who were laggards in signing up for healthcare, as they often are in many things, and I have been much of my life. And so we were constantly having Obama call into ESPN radio, was when we did the Between Two Ferns thing. And all of that was to go to where people are who are the least likely to get the information from traditional sources. And Fauci has done a excellent job of that. He was on Deuces and Marrow. He did the Barstool Spot podcast. He's done a bunch of things that are the kind of innovative communications technique that you want when you're trying to put information in front of people who would not otherwise get it. And so from that point, I give what Fauci has done has been inconsistent with anything Trump has ever done before and quite impressive.
Got it. I'm going to ask you this, and I'm sure you've been asked this a lot. If you were the White House communications director right now, how would you be advising the president of the United States to communicate to the nation? What would be your all right, this is our strategy to do a good job in communicating right now in this time of crisis? How would you advise the president?
Well, I would take Trump out of those briefings. And you would still do that briefing every day. And that briefing would be Fauci, the head of the CDC, the person in charge of getting the test, an update on the vaccine, but you would have an operational briefing with actual information to keep people apprised of your progress. Because even when there is progress for them to apprise people of, it gets lost in whatever fight Trump wants to have that day, or whatever crazy mistake. Like, he can't be trusted to give you information calmly and accurately. He is just temperamentally incapable of that. So by putting him there, you're making it harder to communicate to people what you're actually doing. So that would be an experts only briefing. And then I think the president should stop talking and and be seen doing, right? So it's call with the governors, and we're going to let the press in on the top of that call. We're going to have him sit at his office and call, 15 frontline healthcare workers. And anytime there was a story of heroism or a problem that is seen, you'd have the president engage with those people. And then you'd basically have the president doing, I don't know, that, like, it's hard to always give communications advice to Trump because he is incapable of doing the thing. Like, just, he is mentally and temperamentally incapable of doing the things that I think a president should do. But is that you would want to put him in places where he can be seen as providing people with actual information about social distancing and the need to wash your hands and all of that, and in a unifying fashion, right? Like, I would have called Bush, Carter, and Obama and brought them to the White House and had them spearhead some sort of fundraiser for essential health workers and have them each communicate to their supporters what needs to get done. There are some, like, traditional things that would be in any White House communications director's playbook that are not rule because Trump cannot bring himself to do the things that should be done.
It just so it's pulling him back and bringing in experts to take over that space.
And then use his voice strategically. If he's out there for 2 hours every day, the things that he says don't matter. But if you can, what you want the news to say is not Trump said this. You want the news to say Trump did this. Right. Trump, today, day 68 of the quarantine, President Donald Trump today spoke to governors. He participated in a conference call with world leaders to talk about expanding testing. And he met with a series of Nobel Prize winners to talk about how to get a vaccine, as opposed to, here's this clip of Trump yelling at a New York Times reporter.
It's just so clear, Dan, that this is a time where base level, we need the communication of unity from the highest levels to then trickle down to the rest of us, even, and he is modeling the exact opposite, literally saying, I'm going to let governors choose how they want to do this, and then telling people they should protest their governors. Like, what? Like, you're like that person in the playground that's like mischievely like causing fights between people, and then when the teacher comes, you're like, I didn't do anything. Like, he's being so confusing,
Yeah, I mean, and people are yearning for this. We've seen this in polling. We did this polling exercise. There was a partnership between Crooked Media and Data for Progress, which is a progressive data and analytics and opinion research organization. And we tested a bunch of messages where you would just say the message, right? And the most convincing messages to people were actually, like, normally when you do a poll, Trump's positive messages don't move the needle at all. They just sort of put him where he is. But here, if you tell people, you would ask them, do you find it very convincing, somewhat convincing, or blah, blah, blah. And so we'd say that Donald Trump is working with Democratic governors to address coronavirus. People love that message. Donald Trump worked with Democrats and Republicans in the Senate to, pass a bill so that nearly every American got a $1,200 check. Like, people love that. But so if, like, there would be this world where if Trump could act like a normal president, put aside all the pettiness and the Trump part of it, if he could put himself aside for a minute, he could have the sort of rally around the flag political standing that previous presidents have gotten in times of great crisis. But he can't do it.
Okay, I want to get to Untrumping America, your book, in a second, but before that, I have some 2020 questions. Operator, can you put the link to Untrumping America in the chat box so folks who want to purchase the book that haven't already purchased and read it can do it? Let's give Dan a second to drink out of his red Solo cup. Great. If you were advising Vice President Biden on who he should choose as his vice presidential pick, who would you advise him? And no getting out of this question. You're on my show now. This isn't Pod Save America. I get to ask the questions.
I was going to advise them. I mean, it's that like I am going to get out of it because that is a.
No.
But here, I'm going to
He
sort of get
turns
out of
to
it.
you and
It
says,
is like you need.
You're Dan Pfeiffer. You worked for President Obama. You understand communications. You've got your finger on the pulse of American politics. Dan, who's my lady?
If I were a good communications director, I would definitely tell Vice President Biden that and not tell you first.
But I'm Vice President Biden, you see?
I see where you're going with this. Here's what I would say. I would say that if I was giving him advice, I would think he already took the first piece of advice I would have given, which is that he has to pick a woman. So he's already pledged to do that. So I think that is a very important part of this. But there are two ways to think about it. One is to think safe, and one is to think bold. And you can sit here right now and look at the polling and say, well, we're winning. You know, the poll says I'm up 7 points or 5 points or whatever it is. And so therefore, my goal is to find the person who is A, qualified to be president,
Yeah.
and but B, does no harm politically,
Yeah.
right? And I think that would be a mistake, right? I think you want to be bold. You want to pick someone who can maybe add some excitement to a particular part of the Democratic Party. I think having a ethnically and demographically diverse ticket would be good. So I think someone like Stacey Abrams or Kamala Harris, I think, would add a lot to the ticket and would be exciting to a lot of people. So I think they should play to win with their pick and not play not to lose. And I think the pick has never mattered more than it matters now. In some cases, like it was really true up into the vice presidential pick was never that politically significant. It was like helpful on the margins. You could screw it up, like Palin was like an actual problem. But given Biden's age, given what's happening in the world, I think there will be more scrutiny on this pick than there has been on any previous pick. And so that could force you to be safe, but I think that would be a mistake.
What about Senator Cortez Masto?
Another, I know her less well than I know Kamala Harris and Stacey Abrams, but my experiences with her have been very impressive.
Okay, just two more questions, and then we're going to audience questions. I'm going to ask you for a little bit more time as well. So just be prepared for that request. The second question is about the potential likelihood that we're not allowed to have a Democratic convention in Milwaukee in July. And traditionally, Democratic conventions have been the beginning of when a candidate can really command their national message, the why me, right? They unveil their running mate, and they, I was at the 2015 convention, and it was, Hillary kind of came out and she's like, this is me. This is what this is going to be about. Mm-hmm. How do you think if let's say we can't have a big convention like we wanted, how do you think that affects the race, frankly?
What will really matter is less what happens in the room than the TV attention you get. So the question is, if you are forced to downshift to a smaller in-person convention, will the networks still carry 2 to 3 nights of primetime coverage of speeches, and at least cover the ones you would imagine that would traditionally get primetime coverage would be Biden, the second lady, his running mate, and then former president and Mrs. Obama. That's who usually gets that primetime coverage. And so will the networks who really want to stop covering this, actually I take that back. In the past, they wanted to stop covering it, but that was sort of before linear television took a major hit. And so now live events actually rate pretty well. So there probably would be interest in doing that. And if you have to, and what would be very challenging would be, so if you had to do that with 400 people in the room instead of 15,000 people in the room,
okay,
the acoustics are different, but I think it still has you still get the same benefit from it. The question is, if he has to deliver it like a State of the Union response from an empty room somewhere, will the networks cover it, and how does that impact performance?
Got it. Yeah.
And I think that is a very big question. And I know the DNC, the convention folks, and the Biden campaign have already started thinking about a virtual convention. How do you, because I think you can assume that the convention probably will not look exactly like it was going to look before, just even if, absent like a vaccine being discovered tomorrow and then be distributed to the entire country by August, there are going to be a lot of people who are not going to feel comfortable traveling to Milwaukee and then being in a room with all those people, even
Right.
if that were to be allowed, because
Right.
Trump had liberated Wisconsin. Then so you have to, like, you're gonna have to think about how you can maximize the fundraising, the organizational, and the press footprint of it without the actual convention. I think it's going to be a real challenge for Biden, because you really need those big moments when you're the challenger.
Yeah. I have one more question, then I want to audience questions, and I'd like to ask for 10 more minutes of your time. Can I have that?
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
So your book, in the beginning, you talk about how, so your book is called Undoing Trumpism. It came out in February. And you talked about not just defeating Trump, but also the kind of platform of racism, authoritarianism, all the things that kind of gave rise to Trump and Trumpism. And so your book is about not just defeating him, but defeating those kind of undergirding things that are so noxious about who he is and his presidency. So that came out in February. It's mid-April. 2 months ago it came out, if you can believe it. I mean,
seems like 100 years ago. Yeah.
150 million years ago,
Yeah.
Your book came out. If you were rewriting it, if it were to be released today, what would you have changed from the book? How would you have prescribed differently?
I think I would have kept the same prescriptions, because ultimately what the book is about is that for as horrible as Trump is, he is the symptom, not the disease. And that basically he did to the Republican Party what he did to real estate New York, which was buy a pre-existing structure, put his name on it, and make it a little bit tackier than it was before. And when Trump is gone, all the forces that made Trump be Trump will still be there. And he benefits from this very sort of both a very aggressive Republican strategy of rigging our democracy and a set of institutional challenges the Democrats have, like the Electoral College and the Senate. And if progressives want to have power, we have to take those on. And I think I would obviously probably include the pandemic in the book. It seems topical. And which would be the second time I've had to rewrite it, because I turned it in and then Trump got impeached. So I had to go back and add impeachment into it. But I think all of the consequences of all of the things I'm worried about in the book are actually are sort of manifest in a more stark way because of what we're dealing with right now.
Got it. I have so many more questions for you, and I would love to just do like a real deep dive, like maybe with a beer or something, but I feel like that's just not going to happen. So let's just get to audience questions. Joel, when you spoke at City Arts and Lectures, you mentioned an organization that was already putting effort into swing states so that when a Democratic nominee was selected, they could hit the ground running. Joel was wondering, what was the name of that organization? Do you remember?
It was called Organizing Corps, and it is affiliated with, it's a project of the DNC. And if you go to democrats.org, you can go to the website and figure out, you can both donate to Organizing Corps and apply to work at Organizing Corps. I give the asterisk here that I don't know what our current situation is doing to the hiring of that situation, but basically the Organizing Corps is hiring and training field organizers so that Biden, now as our nominee, has this giant pool of people to hire and get on board right away. Now, what that means, what on board means right now is joining a different Slack channel from your home computer, but Organizing Corps was the name of that group.
All right, and our operator has thankfully put the Organizing Corps website in the chat box. You can click on that if you're interested. Michael, hey Dan, do Democrats have a plan to explain to progressives the importance of, showing up for Biden in November so that we can get progressives onto our federal courts? Conservatives routinely do better than liberals at this. And also, expansion of that question, like, do you think Biden is doing enough, will do enough, can do enough to just get progressives to jump on board, and if so, how?
Well, I think that this week, Bernie Sanders was on today's episode of Pod Save America, addresses this question. And I think Biden is going to be he is going to try to do this. It is very important to unify the party. You saw the first steps of that with his riveting Zoom chat with Bernie last
I
week.
know, it was a little sad, I have to say.
I mean, I think that my takeaway from that was that Biden and Bernie genuinely like each other, and that goes a long way in this situation. And it's pretty clear to me that Bernie Sanders is going to do everything he can to get people involved. Now, I still think there are some things that Biden could do on the policy front, particularly around climate, that
Yeah.
would be good to do. I think they're good substantively, but I
Like
also think that they would say
coming up with the Green New Deal or something.
it's expanding some of the goal, becoming a little more aggressive in some of his plan, which is still the most aggressive plan of any nominee in history, but getting a little closer to maybe where Elizabeth Warren and Jay Inslee were would go a long way. And that's a thing he can do that in a way that is not inconsistent with what he said on the campaign trail. Like, it's not reasonable for people to expect Biden to come out for Bernie's Medicare for All plan now after he just ran an election on this topic and won.
Yeah.
But on climate, I think there's room for him to move. And so I think he will do that. And I actually feel very good about the ability of the party to unify. Biden is our earliest nominee in many, many cycles. And so he's going to all put aside, with the caveats, everything going on in the world, he has more time to heal wounds from the primary and unify than previous people have had to do.
Monica Rodicki sends you a shout out from Wilmington Friends School.
Oh, nice.
Jameen, governors have been pretty kind to Trump since he holds the keys to the Fed's response power and they don't want to piss him off. Do you think Newsom and Cuomo should be fighting back harder?
I think that their job is to take care of the citizens of their state. And if that means being quite polite to Cuomo, or to Trump, then that's what they got to do. It doesn't bother me that they're not. It's not that it is frankly not Andrew Cuomo and it's not Andrew Cuomo and Governor Newsom's job to fight Trump. Their job is to if yelling at Trump, gets the squeaky wheel, some masks and PPE, then do that. And if being nice to him gets you some masks and PPE, do that. And we'll deal. So it's someone else's job to deal with the politics.
Totally agree. Jane, interesting question. Jane is a big PSA fan, and at first I thought like a fan of PSAs, like she likes,
just generally, yes.
She just loves a good PSA, and I'm like, so do I. Like a well-made PSA, can't get better than that. But no, she was referencing your podcast. How can we get Cuomo especially to help with the Biden campaign? He's been competent in the most important issue in this election, coronavirus, and blah, blah, blah. Cuomo's been amazing. How do we get him to help Biden? Great question.
Well, I think he's got to get the situation in New York dealt with first. And if we're in a situation where everything is good in New York and there is some measure of campaigning this fall, Cuomo would be a very powerful surrogate for Biden. Like, Biden has this advantage that now has this stable of people who can draw crowds and get attention and raise large amounts of money in their own right. So obviously he has the Obamas, right? Mm-hmm. He has the people he ran against, like Bernie and Warren and Kamala Harris and all these other people. And then Cuomo now is someone who has become a national Democratic celebrity, who, if he is in a position where he can campaign, would be a big draw and be a big validator. What I think would be interesting is he can say, I have seen what it's like when you have someone else in the Oval Office during a crisis, and I want Joe Biden. I think that would be powerful testimony.
You know what he could do? You know how President Obama did some stuff like this on the 12 campaign? He could do everyone who donates, we'll pick one donor from whoever donates tonight, and they can have Sunday dinner with meatballs with Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah, they could definitely do meatballs and gravy with Cuomo. Yeah.
Oh my God, it would be so successful.
People would give a lot of money for that.
I would give so much money to have meatballs with Governor Cuomo right now. Mark, even though I'm sure they're not kosher. Mark, what can we be doing from our houses right now to help elect Democrats? Does phone banking actually work? Text banking? I'm sure you're getting this a lot.
Yes, phone banking and text banking works. It is something we have to do. The gap is even bigger. The importance of it's even bigger now that there's no offline component where there's no one can go door to door and may not be able to for a very, very long time. There's a lot of models from what happened in Wisconsin last week with the Supreme Court race there, where the Wisconsin Democratic Party organized people to do a whole bunch of digital organizing, including teaching people how to fill out their mail ballots in one-on-one FaceTime conversations.
Cool.
And so there's going to be a lot of work for people to do that kind of stuff. Swing Left and Indivisible are putting together some plans there. The Democratic Party will, and I'm sure Biden's campaign will too, but we're going to have to be more innovative than we have ever been in the past because of the constraints on our old ways of doing things.
And if you're interested in that, I've not made public the time and date, but I'll be having a conversation with Tom Perez, the DNC chair, about that very question. Two questions kind of about like Trump being like unhinged. Susan Pfeiffer asks about saying that, that she has a theory that Trump's been doing his daily briefings to compete with Andrew Cuomo, and no one's really stopped him making it political. And with impeachment behind him, he has no shame. So what do you think about now that, the impeachment thing's behind him, that he feels empowered to do whatever the fuck he wants?
I think that's definitely true. He feels empowered to do whatever he wants. I think he does. I'm sure that there is competition with Cuomo. He is a general New York inferiority complex anyway. And now he can't not do the press conference because a lot of people have said he shouldn't do it. So just in a bit of pure Trumpian stubbornness, he's going to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it definitely has given him control of the narrative and allowed him to be out there, but he has also mishandled that opportunity so greatly. Like it was a few weeks ago, or who knows, maybe it was yesterday, maybe it was 3 weeks ago. I don't really know anymore. But there was one where he just was completely unhinged, and like my first thought was,
the reporter.
Yeah, I think it was the one where he was yelling at the reporter. I mean, that's most of them. It was one where he was really yelling at the reporter. And I was thinking, like, if I could show this to every persuadable voter in Wisconsin, Biden would win this election in a landslide.
Yeah.
And so what the key here is Democrats can't stop Trump from doing these press conferences, and we can't even pressure reporters into asking better questions.
Mm-hmm.
What we can do is look for opportunities where he does things that demonstrate all of his worst qualities and make sure that voters see them by amplifying them in our personal social feeds, and for super PACs doing it with paid advertising.
Mm-hmm. So this question gets to a little bit of an extreme, but actually I'm hearing a lot of people ask this question, which may just be our bubble out here. But Judith asks, what if Trump does not leave the White House when he loses? What can be done? And like at first when I heard this question, I was like, that's crazy. That's not going to happen. But he's literally telling people to protest their own governors in a time of a pandemic. So do you think this is a possibility? And if he doesn't say he's going to leave the White House, what do we do?
Well, I think there's sort of different versions of this question. There was one where he just cancels the election, which he cannot do. There was one where he just says, I'm not leaving. And then you're sort of in a world of like, there's a coup where then the military sides with him and allows him to stay into office. And if you watch any of these briefings, it doesn't seem like they're particular fans of his either. But the one there is a version that I do worry about. And there's one where he just says he's not leaving, and then Joe Biden just works around him in the Oval Office for a while until he gets shamed and walks out the door. But the one that is legitimate is he's definitely, no matter what happens, going to call into question the legitimacy of the election.
Yeah.
And we know that because he has spent 3 years calling into question the legitimacy of the election he won. So what do we think he's going to do when he loses?
Right.
And it is most likely, although no one can make a prediction, but your best guess would be it will be a very, very close election. And so I would be worried about him using all of the powers of a rigged court to try to stop the counting of votes, to try to discount some votes, in particular. And that I worry about that under a normal circumstance, but even more so in a world where the election is going to be conducted in a very unique environment where a lot of states are doing vote by mail for the first time and some aren't doing it at all. And so there's not a real prescription for that other than we got to do everything we can to win by as much as possible to make it harder for him to engage in that. So winning by 100,000 votes in a state is really like 10 times better politically than winning by 20,000 votes, right? There's like an exponential measure to it.
I guess let's get through this pandemic and then cross that bridge when we get to it.
Yeah.
Jennifer,
let's win the election and then figure out what happens.
Right. Jennifer, do your sponsors on the pod ever get mad for goofing off during ads?
Never, not once. It's never happened.
Um, okay. I like this question. Trump's incompetence is a given. Why are we at risk of him winning again? And, there's an undergirding question of like, he's demonstrated for 3.5 years how idiotic he is. Why is this going to be such a tough fight?
And almost entirely because his base, which is um, working class white people and mostly white men from rural areas, are dramatically overrepresented in the electoral college. If this was a popular vote election, where we were just like a normal country that just operated on this crazy idea that whoever gets the most vote wins, Trump would definitely lose. It would not even be close. But his votes count more than his voters' votes count a lot more than a typical Democratic base voter. And it is like, this is the fundamental reason why I wrote the book, is our politics is rigged in favor of conservative voters. And it is because Wisconsin is a state that has a very large number of Trump's base voters. He's in a very good position to win what we call the tipping point state.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is the challenge. Biden will, if we can have something resembling a normal election, Biden will almost certainly win the popular vote by more than Hillary Clinton won it by. But he still might lose the electoral college.
I just learned, I'm reading Team of Rivals, and I just learned that during the Lincoln Douglas debates, I always thought that he did so well that he won that Senate race, but he actually lost the Senate race in Illinois, but he won the popular vote in Illinois. But even back then in 1850 or whatever it was, he lost because of gerrymandering, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know. Susan asks, when should Biden announce his VP pick? I'm interested in your answer to this question.
Traditionally, almost every time in the last like 30 years, the pick has been announced in the 10 days leading up to the convention. I think there is an argument for doing it sooner this time and just sort of doubling your Zoom. So you can have two candidates out there making the case, because you're so limited in the amount of campaigning you can do. So if he could, whoever he picks, now you've got two people who can be raising money. You have two people who can be doing interviews. You just doubles your firepower at a time in which you need a lot more firepower.
Got it. And a very important question from Benjamin Kane. Dan, do you have other things to drink out of outside? Do you have other things to drink out of outside of a red Solo cup? If no, is it a nostalgic ode to your college years, or simply the best way to stay hydrated?
There are other things to drink. They are not within reach. They're not in this room with me right now, but I have a number of glasses, even some Crooked Media tumblers. There are many things. This just happened to be the thing that was in my office when I had a dry throat in preparing to speak for 45 minutes.
I will believe it when I see it. Will Slack, how should Democrats bust their bubbles to understand how precarious the race actually is compared to their experience or the people directly around them in the blue stronghold? Interesting question.
I think that it's a real interesting. Okay, sure. I think in 2016 we had this bubble problem where everyone thought Trump was certainly going to lose, and particularly if you lived in the Bay Area, there's a very good chance you interacted with very few Trump voters on a daily life, particularly in the city of San Francisco, as I did at the time. But I'm not so worried about people thinking Trump is definitely going to lose this time, for that same reason, because he's won once and our brains are broken by that. And so complacency is not a thing I care deeply about. I do think we think about our bubbles in terms of Republicans and Democrats. And the bubble I want people to get out of more is voters and non-voters, right? Like the 40% of Americans who do not engage in our politics, right? Who are of all stripes, politically, demographically, age-wise. It's not just young people. It's not just people of color. It's not just college students. It's everyone. And those are the people we need to understand, because you're more likely to be able to persuade someone who is not engage in our politics to engage in our politics, then you are going to be able, in a very polarized time, to convince someone wearing a MAGA hat to take it off and pick up a no malarkey coffee cup or whatever your symbol of Biden identity is.
Okay, let's end this question with Daniel Lewis. What do you think are the issues? I have to say there have been a lot of questions and also a lot of comments where people are like, we are getting a lot of hope and inspiration from this conversation, which I know you get a lot, Dan. But for those who've written
That's
in
nice.
comments, thank you for writing them in, and they're being read and appreciated. Thank you. Daniel Lewis, what do you think are the issues that Joe Biden cares most about and would work the hardest to accomplish? Are campaign finance and electoral reform and climate change on the short list? Because yes, you worked with him for 8 years and more than that, I think.
I think the issue, particularly where we live, like in the environment we are currently in and will likely be in November, what he's going to care most about is fixing the economy and doing so in a way that's consistent with the values of the people who grew up in his working class neighborhood. He in every I was in 1 million economic policy meetings with Biden, and he was constantly his barometer of how he judges something is whether it would impact the people in his. We're in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where he grew up, or his neighborhood of Claymont, Delaware, is a working class neighborhood near where I grew up. Like, how would it affect those people? And like, so he is going to be, and he is the person that President Obama tasked to oversee the Recovery Act and rebuilding the economy after the financial crisis. And so he's now going to likely be coming into office with an even bigger hole to dig out of. So that's going to be his passion. I know he does care deeply about climate and will do a lot for that. The place where I probably have the biggest political disagreement with Biden is he has been less engaged on issues of structural political reform, like getting rid of the filibuster in the Senate. And hopefully, I think he will come around on those things, because one thing about Joe Biden that I thought was very important, and from that Elizabeth Warren endorsement video that was so great the other day, is that Joe Biden listens to people. He is not someone who is stuck in his ways, and if he can be persuaded to do things. And so that is the message that I would give any progressive activists out there who, may have supported Bernie or may have supported Warren or another candidate over Biden, is that Biden is someone who you can work with,
Yeah.
who can be persuaded. It doesn't mean he's going to come all the way to your position or he's going to completely change what he had previously stood for, but he can be persuaded to change his opinion. He is someone who, as has been pointed out many times, was a very vocal, who supported the Iraq War and had a very specific position on it for a long time. But when he became Biden's nominee, he's the person that Obama put in charge of getting U.S. troops out of Iraq. And that is because he is someone who he is not stubborn. He can be persuaded. And so I think if you don't love where he is on climate, you don't love where he is on healthcare issues or another thing, activism will work, and I think you will find a very strong ally in Biden, even if he's not exactly where you want him now. I think he can get a much closer to your position over time.
I do have to say that listening to you and David Plouffe, I get the same, it feels the same way. I feel like calmed down by your explanation of things, not because of the way you talk, but just because of kind of how you talk. And it's really nice. It's very reassuring.
It's a very big move for Delaware, since Plouffe and I are both from the same town in Delaware. So I think it's part of our.
Is it a Delawarean thing? Would you say?
I think it's a Delawarean thing. Yes.
Uh-huh. I'd like to direct everyone that's on this conversation to the chat box, not to all the trolls, but to the link in the chat box that's about to go in, the Join It link. That is the link to become a sponsor of Mannys. Also, it's right above my head. It's joinit.org/o/Mannys. Mannys is shut down right now, and we do need your help if we're going to be able to reopen and stick it through this really long and slow recovery. So if you are able, please go to joinit.org/o/Mannys to become a sponsor. It's $36 a month, and we're using the community to help us through this. I want to also thank our staff here, Jupiter, Sam, and Ram, for powering this call and being so awesome. Dan, I'm going to give you the last word. What would you like to say?
Just one, support Mannys. I used to live 12 blocks from Mannys. It was in my neighborhood, and it's a very important addition to that neighborhood, and to support it if you can. And everyone stay safe out there, and we will get through this in the end. And if we do what it takes, this is a very winnable election, and we could come out of this with a Democrat in the White House and the Democrats controlling the Senate, and a lot of work cleaning up after the mess Trump left, but certainly better than the alternative.
Well, I'm going to leave you to keep drinking water out of your red Solo cup. Hydrated, Dan. Make sure don't throw anything away, any cups away. Just keep drinking out of your red Solo.
I love the planet like Joe Biden. So there you go.
All right. Have a good rest of your evening. Thank
Okay.
you so much, Dan.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Of course. Bye.